So hello everyone, Moadim L'Simcha, Moadim Shalom. I hope you're all enjoying your Passover holiday. My name is Rabbi Tarlan Rabizadeh. I'm the Vice President of Jewish Engagement here at AJU, and I am so excited to be having a session about pursuing racial justice with Rabbi Sandra Lawson. A quick bio. Rabbi Lawson received her ordination from the Reconstructionist Rabbinical College in June 2018. She is currently the Director of Racial Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Reconstructing Judaism. Prior to moving to Philadelphia, Sandra served in the United States Army as a military police person with a specialty in military police investigations, specializing in cases involving child abuse and domestic violence. After the military, she became the go-to person when law enforcement in the South needed information on hate groups. And today, Rabbi Lawson sees herself as a 21st century rabbi, connecting to people through music and technology. As a Black queer Jew, she hopes to use her rabbinic training to bring attention to Jewish diversity, environmental issues, and poverty. Please learn more about Rabbi Lawson at www.rabbisandralawson.com. So welcome, Rabbi Lawson. But you are tuning in right now from North Carolina, is that correct?
I am. I'm in my home office in North Carolina.
Lovely. I used to work there for a short time, so it's a special place in my heart. I told a bunch of my friends that I was going to be interviewing you today, and they all kind of knew about your love of music. So I kind of want to start off with just saying, two of them actually asked this. What is your favorite Kabbalat Shabbat song?
Oh,
Do you have a few?
I do. And these days I'm leaning into more contemporary music, by Joe Buchanan and Nefesh Mountain and Yosef Goldman, and Sue Horowitz and some other people that I'm thinking of. And so um, I love their melodies. And I mean, yeah, I just like Lachado D. I guess if I were to pick like something that I look forward to singing on Shabbat, is Lachado D.
I love it. Well,
Yeah,
that's definitely one that's
yeah.
welcoming in Shabbat. Okay, so Kabbalat Shabbat, I love that. What about Passover? Because we're here together to really talk about some of the themes of Passover. And I know that one of the themes you and I have spoken about before is freedom, and we're going to get to that. But is there a song, is there music that really helps you kind of move with the theme of Passover and that you wanted to share?
Yeah, so like for me and my family, my friends, like definitely leaning into this, Zaman Karatain, the time of our freedom. And as a Black Jewish woman, and someone who shares the memory of uh, of enslavement in Mitzrayim. I use the Hebrew word intentionally, for Egypt, but Mitzrayim, the place that caused us pain, the narrow place, the place where we weren't free. I carry that memory, and I also carry the memory of my ancestors who were brought to the United States and during slavery. So I really lean into Negro spirituals, Black spirituals, and as part of our celebration of Passover.
Lovely. I don't know if all our audience knows, but Mitzrayim, as Rabbi Lawson said, the root of it is sar, which means narrow.
Mhm.
And a lot of Yiddish speakers also say tsuris, right? Sarot in Hebrew, like being in a confined and narrow place. So tell me a little bit about, I guess, your journey here. I think one of the questions that I really want to delve into is, sort of the intersecting identities that you have and how that speaks to your Judaism, but also just learning a little bit about you and what you've seen that the world needs. And how did you decide that your rabbinical work is going to be the one that's going to be the vehicle that's going to help you sort of help the world, I'm assuming, become a better place?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I didn't start out on this path, if the path were going the way that I had thought it would, I'd be an academic, a researcher, or a professor teaching sociology in some liberal arts college somewhere. That was the dream, in my fantasy, walking around on campus talking to students. In my fantasy, there was not a like actual grading papers or anything, but like, you know, um, that teaching and you know, being an academic and a researcher, that was the plan. Um, and I think sometimes that our journeys change, our lives change, and sort of leaning into that. Um, Around 2004, I started to get invitations from clergy in the city of Atlanta to be part of this larger coalition of faith leaders. I wasn't a faith leader. I was a Black member of a predominantly white congregation. But this faith coalition didn't have a lot of religious diversity. In fact, um, diversity at that time sadly meant Jews and Christians. It didn't include many other groups. And the only Jewish person in the room for many of these meetings was my friend, who's also a rabbi, Joshua Lesser. And I started working with other clergy on issues that were important to me. And working with clergy who didn't necessarily agree with me. In fact, I know I worked with clergy who thought I was going to hell, either because I'm Jewish or because I'm gay. But we were trying to find common ground to keep the state out of people's business, to keep the state out of the people's bedrooms.
Mm.
And I like that environment of finding of common ground. And I started to think less about getting a PhD in sociology and I started to think more about what it means to be a spiritual leader. For me, that meant being a rabbi.
But you always like people, it seems like, right? Because sociology is, right? What is it? It's a study of understanding people.
Yeah, it's a study of groups, a study of people, a study of, it's like how groups function in our society, how groups play into our society, how different, there's different segments of that. My focus would have been on like race and class, but my actual my graduate degree focus was on environmental justice, which has all those things in there.
Got it. Well, you can't ever really put those lenses away, and I'm sure you've
No.
carried it with you, right?
Hmm.
But as you were talking about how, teaching and hanging and kind of learning from students, I was thinking about how the Haggadah is actually the oldest curriculum that we have. And it was
Hmm.
a way of really teaching, well, our children,
Hmm.
right, on how to ask questions and how to essentially be good people, not just for themselves, but to
Hmm.
carry it out into the world. So tell me a little bit about this holiday and what it kind of comes to teach us about some of the work that you're doing. I can be specific,
Hmm.
but I kind of want to leave it broad.
No, I think when, Passover, they say it's the most celebrated holiday in the United States, or maybe it's the most celebrated holiday in the world. And I think it's because it's celebrated in the home. I mean, people for
Yeah.
centuries have created their own practices. Many people have created their own Haggadah, their own prayer book, or their own story of the holiday. And there's not some rabbi figure or some authority figure standing over them telling you, yes, you must do it this way, you must do it that way. And we're given this framing of what it means to be enslaved in a country and what it means to want to be free and to actually have our freedom. And then we're commanded to tell the story as if we were actually present there at the moment. And that to me is powerful, and we're still telling this story centuries later. And to be in different families and watch how people make this holiday their own, and the stories that they tell and the stories they pass down, the food that they share. I used to work with college students who believed that everybody's Seder plate was the same, and to hear them like figure out that no, like this is how we made haroset, this is what we put on our Seder plate, and have them see that like there's all these differences and all of it's Jewish and it's wonderful. For some people, that's scary. Like we all do it the same way. And for other people, that's really awesome. And and as we were talking before, I think as we talk about our own liberation as Jewish people, and we're telling the story of what it means to be enslaved and getting our freedom, I think personally as a rabbi that it's irresponsible to talk about our own liberation without engaging with today and other folks that might not be free and other folks that are not liberated, and using our platforms to help other people seek liberation.
Absolutely. I think you touched on it. I mean, first of all, it's true. I went to second night Seder at
Mhm.
an old congregant's Ashkenazi home, and I'm Mizrahi myself, and they didn't believe me that we don't use the same horseradish for maror. I was like, we don't. We use lettuce, and they're like, what? What have you been doing? So it's really funny you say that, but there's something really true about when it's in your own home, you kind of get to make Judaism your own,
Mhm.
and you get to lead it, and you get to have a sort of spiritual journey. But out there in the synagogue, there's somebody else that sometimes leads it. And
Mhm.
sometimes I can even feel like I'm supposed to fit into someone else's kind of Judaism, especially as a Mizrahi Jew, and feeling, in a very majority Ashkenazi world here in the US, especially in the liberal world, right?
Mhm.
As a female rabbi, it's not really fun for me to go to very traditional places.
Mhm.
I don't get to do the same kinds of things. So I end up going to liberal circles, and they end up being a certain kind of Judaism. So
Mhm.
what are some of the things that I guess you've picked up on and learned? I mean, as a human, as a sociologist, but also with the work you're doing, all the lenses combined about the work that we need to do out there in the world to be more inclusive,
Oh, so
especially
much
in the
work.
Jewish world. Sorry.
It's so much work. There's so much work to be done. I mean,
Yeah.
I think, yeah, like I sort of laugh, but there's so much work to do, but also that like sometimes the work feels like too much, so people don't do anything. And
Fair.
um, I think it's really important for, I'm sorry, actually, I need you to repeat the question because I got all stuck in the whole like it's so much work. So I just need you to like repeat the question.
What's the work that we can do,
Mhm.
out there to be more inclusive? How do we give that at home Passover feeling out there in the synagogue where people can take ownership?
I think we need to listen. I mean, there's a variety of challenges right now that I think are happening in synagogues, and so I think that one, I think people need to listen. So not necessarily in the synagogue or outside the synagogue, but well, actually, let's stay in the synagogue. So if I come to a synagogue and I'm telling you as that you as a white person, but another person is a white person, um, I'm having a very different experience in this community because of my race. What should happen in that moment is the other person should listen.
Mm,
But sadly, what actually happens in many communities is that's not right. Like I can't believe that's actually happening to you. And so, and I'm going to stretch a little bit when when we want non-Jews to take us seriously and understand that we are experiencing anti-Semitism,
yeah.
and they don't listen. The same thing is happening in our communities when it comes to marginalized folks when they talk about either racism or homophobia that they're experiencing. And we need to listen to marginalized people when they tell us things, just in the same way we want the larger society to hear us when we talk about anti-Semitism. Also, Judaism is changing. It's changing all over the place, no matter where you are. A new generation is coming along. Sound familiar? Another generation is coming along and claiming their own Judaism. They're claiming a Judaism that works for them. It may look different than how you and I celebrate Judaism. It's definitely going to look different than our grandparents celebrated Judaism, but it's going to be their Judaism, their way. There's all these demographic studies that come out that talk about the nuns, like NON, non-Jew, or the younger generation doesn't want this, or they don't go to synagogue. But what they do say is that these young people these people do strongly see themselves as Jews, that they have a strong Jewish identity. And we need to make sure that we're creating an environment for them so they can be seen. And it may not be the same way that we did Judaism.
Yeah.
A mentor of mine, B'nai Lappi, has said in a video, interview, she said that I think she, and if I get this wrong, Benet, I'm sorry, but that she's convinced that like 20 years from now, Judaism will be completely unrecognizable to us.
Right.
And for her and me, that's actually exciting. But for other people, that's like, no, that can't be right.
Yeah, I'm scared to hear that. Why am I scared to hear that? Why is that so scary?
I think because, well, I don't know.
I'm
And I
inviting
tell you
you.
why I find it exciting, but I
Yeah,
can,
tell me.
yeah, I find it exciting because that means that, like we have always done, we've found ways to survive and we have found ways to invent and to be entrepreneurial about our Judaism. I mean, think about centuries ago when the Second Temple was destroyed.
Yeah,
There were a group of Jews who were like, I'm waiting for the temple. Y'all do what you want. I'm gonna wait. I'm waiting for the temple, the third temple. Other folks were like, well, I quit. I'm gonna go over here with these folks called Christian, maybe. Um, and other people were like, we got to figure out what to do. And those people, came up with rabbinic Judaism. And that's where we are today. Some people like to tell the story, well, we just went to rabbinic Judaism. No, there was
that's
a
true.
struggle in
There's a
there.
gap. Yeah,
And but rabbinic Judaism survived, and that's that's the Judaism we have today. And I think we're in a similar position right now where Judaism is going to change again. And people who think that Judaism has never evolved over time, it has. It has evolved and it continues to evolve, and it's been evolving the whole way through. So, um, synagogue memberships may be declining. People may not want to go into houses of worship to pray, but they are finding their own ways to be Jewish. And for some people, that's through social justice, social action. And for others, it's something else. And I feel like our job as Jewish leaders is to help people engage with their Judaism wherever they are and sort of guide or witness with them along the way.
beautiful. Yeah, it's funny that I just said it was scary because I think in so many ways every change is loss, and I think the rabbis have
Mhm.
said that at some point. And you and I wouldn't be here as rabbis if we weren't allowed to sort of reclaim and change Judaism
Mhm.
also. So there's a lot of beauty that comes from change. But I want to see if you could actually help me
Mhm.
define social justice a little bit. Because there's been times where I feel like I've been being an activist about Iran or just sit from the comforts of my own couch posting things on Instagram and people are like, oh, she's an activist. And I feel like there's so much more I need to do to be an activist. So can you help me define what social justice means and maybe the different ways that could manifest itself? Um,
I want to tell you two things
yeah.
that are about my own personal experience, and hopefully that will help with the definition. Um, the training that I got, part of it from my mentors, said if you go to a pulpit, don't make any drastic changes within the first 3 years. Learn from the community, and then after 3 years, if you want to make some changes, make some changes.
Right.
If you make changes, make small changes, but don't make any big changes. Well, my first job was not a pulpit. I was at a college. And I remember telling a colleague of mine, um, that I wanted to do more in the community. I wanted, outside of the college, I wanted to do a lot more. And that I felt like I couldn't do some of the social justice stuff that I wanted to do, whatever that meant at the time for me. And she said to me, your presence at that college as a rabbi and all of you is social justice. You're for the fact that the college hired a Black queer rabbi. That you were a walking billboard of social justice. You don't have to do anything. And I was just like, and I sat with that for a minute. That is a statement in itself, that I'm standing there knowing that there are parents, or donors that may not like that choice, may be confused by that choice, or maybe wish that I was a dude. I don't know, but that really stuck with me, and I realized there was a lot of power in not necessarily doing those things because my existence is social justice. Now, flash forward to 2020, the beginning height of all the protests for Black Lives Matter.
Mhm.
And I was writing op-ed pieces for the Forward. I was talking about racism in the United States uh, um, and Jewish communities. I was helping white folks understand this moment. And I remember being in my kitchen, telling myself I was making breakfast, and I'm like, I'm not doing anything. I should be, and I should be. I don't know what I thought. I wasn't going to leave my house because I was masked like other people. like I should be doing, I'm not doing enough. And I had to stop. And I was like, I am not 20. I'm doing what I need to do in this moment to make the world better, make the world understand this moment with my skills, and also support young people who were in the streets because I was getting a lot of calls and I was supporting them. And so I'm saying all that to say that we all do what we can do and what works for us. It doesn't have to be big, but it's what we can do in that moment. And so there's my answer.
That's great. That's great. Yeah. Sorry, I'm sitting with it because I think that's
Mhm.
so profound. Um, so tell me a little bit about it's funny because when they asked me about meeting with you, there was actually a short little article that was out, and they asked me, what are the kinds of things that I think the theme of Passover is in relation. And I said, actually persuading people to ask more questions,
Mhm.
because helping people ask more questions, takes away ignorance, takes away distance, helps with understanding. And you said, on the other hand, a couple questions ago, people should learn how to listen.
Mhm.
How can we help kind of teach that? How can we help teach either or both in our
Mhm.
communities? Because I think I'm still hovering around that, because I think people are scared to ask questions, and I think people don't know how to listen. And I'm wondering if you've had positive experiences with that.
So here's this is what comes up for me when you say that. So, in this holiday of asking questions, and yes, I hear a lot that it's good to question, that we like to ask questions. The sad thing about that, and I support asking questions. People should ask questions. People should be curious. But there's a line between curiosity and boundaries.
Um,
So when Black and brown people come to our communities, and not just Black and brown people, marginalized folks, or really anybody that doesn't fit into whatever somebody thinks a Jew supposed to be, um, and people ask inappropriate questions of the person of color coming in the room or the trans person, but let's just stick with the person of color. And the response is often, if it's uncomfortable, is, well, I'm just curious, or I want to get to know you. And if I give someone a boundary, if you ask me a question and if I give you a boundary and you don't respect that boundary, then we've moved beyond curiosity. Here's some examples. A Black person walks into a synagogue, somebody asks an inappropriate question like, when did you convert? You know, and how long have you been Jewish, or something like that? Not a question you would ask a stranger. So just think that. And then I say, you know, I don't know you, or I want to sit down, I just want to go to the sanctuary and pray, um, or I want to talk to my friend, or whatever it is. And you don't respect that boundary by continuing to insist that you need that information. That doesn't help with security. It doesn't help with anything that people will say. That is not about curiosity. That is a need for the other person to know how I fit in here, as if me answering those questions is going to tell them anything about myself. And so, um, and I've had that happen a lot. And I'm like, I don't really want to have this conversation with you, but then the other person insists on knowing. It's not about curiosity. So when people ask questions of others that are different than them, they should really check themselves to think, is it really a curiosity, or I'm really just trying to figure out why this Black person is here?
I've been asked that
Hmm.
when I've converted,
Hmm.
which I just found hilarious,
Hmm.
because people actually probably look more like us than
Hmm.
anybody else
Right.
in those days. So,
Hmm.
okay, so asking questions good, can be dangerous, and
Hmm.
unfortunately, not everybody's always aware. Even I'm not always aware
Hmm.
of some of the things. So that's a great lesson in understanding caution. I think one other thing that you said to me a couple weeks ago when we were talking, and I think we were just talking about Ashkenazi Jewry, and you said something like, well, we should remember that all Ashkenazim are not white.
Right.
And
Yeah.
I'm just bringing that up because it was a huge aha moment. It's like almost like I knew that filed away, but I didn't know that. Does that happen often in the world? I guess,
Hmm.
where people just assume, right? So is that sort of because I've always been asked about, the Jews of color and whether I identify, and I've always kind of veered away from that just because I would rather say I'm a Persian Jew. Because in my house, if you come over for dinner and you say I'm a Mizrahi Jew, it's not really helpful.
Hmm.
You have to say, I'm a Libyan Jew, and they'll be like, oh, try that spicy one right there, or something like that, so that it gives a little bit of color, for lack of a better word, on like where you come from.
Right.
But I think in my first conversation with you and prepping for this, we both kind of came to a conclusion about how limiting language is.
Mhm.
And so I wanted to just let our audience just talk a little bit about this and like just discuss it a little bit. Tell us a little bit about identifying as a Jew of color, and what that means. So
Yeah. So let's look, first of all, I want to say that all of these racial markers that we have in the United States are completely
yes,
made up. They're not based on anything. I mean, they really
yes,
aren't. I mean, for example, when we talk about Asians, who exactly are we talking about? We're talking about a group of people, if you without the marker of Asian, um, don't fit together. Like, don't fit together at all. And so, um, and because we live in a society that is um, uh, a society that was designed to privilege one group of people, white people, over other folks, this marker of people of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, Black, Indigenous people of color, are designed to basically separate people, not separate, but designed to say that I'm not a white person. Um, and I liked identifying as a person of color because in our society, the assumption is whiteness. And if you understand that, you can hear how whiteness is coded into everything.
you're talking generally speaking, not
Generally
just
speaking,
racially.
right. Generally speaking, how whiteness is coded into everything. When they say that they're talking about people, but you can actually hear they're really talking about white people. They're not talking about Black people or brown people or whatever. Same thing happens in the Jewish community. The assumption in many of our synagogues is Ashkenazi culture.
Yeah.
The food is often, when we say Jewish food in America, we're really talking about food that came from Eastern Europe. Hopefully that will change. Um, and um, because whiteness um, is assumed as normal or assumed as what everybody else does, then you have to have another way to distinguish something else. And so people of color, um, or some other marker, helps people understand that not all things are the same.
Right. I see. Okay. So great. A unit coming together and sort of for trying to create change that way.
Mhm.
Tell me a little bit about our lives as female rabbis. And do you think that that's, I mean, you also have the queer identity, and there's a lot of intersectionality in your life. And even thinking back to the time where you were at Hillel, I mean, in your existence, did you
Mhm.
feel that it created a change? Students came up to you, that you're kind of creating a ripple effect, as we say in Kabbalah, by just being who we are
Oh yeah,
out in the
yeah,
world? Yeah.
yeah. So what's interesting about that is that so when in our society, even when people are used to having female rabbis, the job title still assumes male. And sometimes the expectation that people have on rabbis is the expectations they would have on a dude about 50 years ago, assuming that he could spend all their time with the community, and the wife would be at home doing whatever. And nobody wants that anymore. I don't care what your gender is. Like, people have boundaries around their lives. And then, yeah, even when I was at Elon as the campus rabbi and I would work with Hillel, even some of the experiences, expectations the students had, I could tell the way they were framing it as if I was a male rabbi. And I also know that those wonderful 18 to 21-year-olds will never walk through life again assuming that all rabbis are male, excuse me, all rabbis are male, all rabbis are straight, and all rabbis are white. They can't
Right.
say that anymore. I know they can't. Because
Yeah,
and also the other thing I want to say is they didn't care about any of that stuff. All they cared is that I showed up when I was supposed to show up and I was there for them.
beautiful. Yeah. Um, I hope it's okay that I'm understanding my own life by asking these questions because it's really helpful. I'm going
That's
to
what
ask,
we're here for as colleagues, though. We need each
yeah,
other because this
we
job
do.
is very isolating.
It is. It really is.
Mhm,
And like you said, for a position that was predominantly made
mhm,
for men, it's really hard to create your own
mhm,
and figure out what you're supposed to be. Um, but I want to feel some questions that are coming in from the
mhm.
audience as well. One of our audience members, Mark, has asked, what has been your experience with anti-Semitism in the Black community?
None really. I mean, actually, let me rephrase that. I
Great.
got
I
confused
love
with
yeah, let's rephrase the questions.
yeah, but also want to say not ref. I mean, in my mind, when I heard the question, I was thinking in real life IRL versus online.
Oh,
So I have had almost none experiences in real life when it came to anti-Semitism. About 20 years ago, I was at a black feminist queer thing. I don't even know. As far as I know, I was the only Jew in the room, but everybody else in the room was black and female identified. And some person who I don't know and would not recognize today made an anti-Semitic comment. And my friend next to me put her hand on my knee and she's like, "Don't worry, we got this." And people who I didn't know, I'm not even sure if everybody in the room knew I was Jewish, were like saying that's anti-Semitic, we don't do that, that's wrong, whatever, whatever, whatever. And and I didn't have to worry about it, and they also knew that it was wrong. Um, but online though, and I didn't face that much anti-Semitism online. Actually, that's not true. Until recent history, most of the anti-Semitism I got online actually came from Jewish folks, and I can unpack that in a minute.
please.
Yes. But um, but because every once in a while there's some black celebrity who puts their foot in their mouth and says something, and then I'm supposed to answer as to why they did it, as if it didn't hurt me also. Um, and and any of the like personal attacks have come from people infusing Israel with American Jewry and assuming that all Jews are responsible for another state. So that's been the extent of my anti-Semitism. I can go back to the Jewish anti-Semitism if you want.
Please, let's unpack.
Yeah, and so I'm not the I'm this is I want to say this is something that's unique to Jews of color, but I'm not sure. It could be something that's unique to marginalized people in general. So, um, my example of this, but I'm not alone. This has happened to other people. So a few years ago, uh, there was somebody who did an op-ed piece. I don't know who this person is. I really don't. They did an op-ed piece for not a major Jewish publication, but a Jewish publication.
Okay.
And in this piece, they didn't like some of my comments about racism in the Jewish community, or didn't like some of the things I said. And so what they needed to do in this argument was get to how my statements are anti-Semitic. But they couldn't do that because I'm Jewish and I'm a rabbi. So what they then did, and this example has happened multiple times, so I'm sort of merging them together. What they do is they strip away my Jewishness. They articulate why I'm not Jewish. Then they articulate, since I'm not Jewish, they explain how I can't possibly be a rabbi. And then it's a formula. And then, since all those things are not true, therefore, what I'm saying about the Jewish community is anti Semitic.
How,
This is, and this happens a lot.
how do we combat something like that? What is your advice?
I sick other people on. No.
You?
No, I have a like on Twitter or whatever. I if somebody wants to engage with that, like, and I don't usually argue with people, but if they insist, I just say if somebody wants to help this person understand why their comments are inappropriate, then people do. I block people, and sometimes I report comments, but yeah, like I think part of it is there's always bad players in every community.
Totally.
And there are bad players in the Jewish world. But also, and I forgot, I can't believe I forgot about this. Um, the intersection of identities creates new forms of discrimination. So here's another story that happened in real life. Um, when I was a campus rabbi at Elon University, um, a parent came in. So, if kids going to school, going to college, they tour campuses. So a mother and her daughter came into the Hillel office. They met the assistant director at Hillel, and she said to my friend, um, I want to meet the rabbi. I get a call, says there's a family down here, they want to meet you. Cool, be right down. And I come down the stairs, kippah wearing, by the way, I'm not wearing one right now, but um, and uh, and an authority figure who's already been identified as the assistant director says, "This is our rabbi, Rabbi Sandra Lawson." To which the parent, the mom, looks at me up and down and says, "Are you ordained?" And I was like, yes. And like it was an odd question. And she then asked like two or three other times. At this point, I'm looking at the daughter, who was actually my audience, because that's the person I'm actually really concerned about, who is noticeably embarrassed and wants to retreat. So I have to figure out a way to comically get out of here. And so I just said, hey, if you follow me to my office, I have a business card that says rabbi on it that might help. And so we did, and it stopped, and it was, people laughed. But
Yeah.
I'm pointing this out as anti-Semitism because seriously, if an authority figure introduces a rabbi as a rabbi, and the follow-up question is, are you ordained? No university in this country is going to hire a rabbi that's not ordained. I mean, seriously, it doesn't work that way. And so, and that example is an example of how anti-Semitism and racism factor in.
Can you can you help me understand more about why that's not racism, but
It is racism.
anti-Semitism?
It's both.
Oh, it's both. Why is it anti-Semitism exactly?
Because she did not believe that I was actually the rabbi, and also probably questioned that I was Jewish. And in that statement is making a statement, whether she realized it or not,
Right.
publicly, I can't possibly be the rabbi.
Because in
That is
our
not
Judaism, that wouldn't be.
right.
Yes,
That
got it.
is not something that happens to white colleagues. When I've told that to white colleagues, they're just like, not, I don't even have to say anything else. Like the fact that it'd be one thing if I said, hi, I'm Rabbi Sandra Lawson, and she didn't believe me, fine. But it wasn't, she just said, are you ordained? That's the thing. That is one of the oddest questions. And yes, I'm sure she was confused. I don't know, but that just shows how racism and Judaism and sort of how people see
Totally,
that, and how for a black person, a black rabbi, that's like the intersection of racism and anti-Semitism.
totally, totally. And not to diminish your example, but I've had
Mhm.
one that was, you don't look like a rabbi.
Right. Well, yeah, yeah,
And
yeah.
what am I supposed to look like? Sometimes I just want to just take a couple of the curls and just like put the rest of my to have it. But yeah.
Yeah, but
Um,
she didn't believe I was a rabbi, and the only thing she could say was, "Okay, this person told me I'm a rabbi, so let me ask if you're ordained." Like that, like pulled the wool over an entire university and the person who just introduced me.
got it. Um, so I want to talk a little bit more about I guess the role that technology has
Hmm.
in your world? I mean, I started off by saying music and technology was something that you put in your bio as something that really drives you. But what is the role that technology plays for us today? I mean, I know Gen Z could say a lot more about that, but what is it? How does it manifest in your life? First, let's
You
start
and
there.
I are talking. You and I have never met and would have probably never have met if it hadn't been for technology. I mean, maybe we would have. I'd have flown out to California, you to come here, whatever. But we don't have to do things in that way. And um, technology, I mean, think about it. Just moving out of screens. Well, not moving out of screens, moving out of Zoom. Safaria, for example, for the
Right.
longest time. Um, the only people who had access to those texts were people who could read those texts, and usually were people who had titles like you and I. Now, because of technology, a group of people are trying to translate or have multiple translations for all of our texts so people can absorb them and have access to them. I mean, that's awesome.
Right.
Um, and because of social media, like somebody asked me once years ago why so many people today were interested in Judaism, to which I said, um, I'm sure the first people that put stuff, first Jews, the first rabbis that put stuff out on YouTube, I'm sure they were talking to other Jews. I'm sure they were. Whether they were in the synagogues, they were talking to a Jewish audience. But because of the way the internet works, it doesn't mean it just stays with those people. That means other people will find it, which means other people will have questions and other people want to learn and other people want to learn and grow. And some of those people might want to throw their lot in with us. Um, I have been able to connect with people who have left the Jewish community. They are Jews, but they've left because they didn't like their rabbis for whatever reason or didn't feel safe in their synagogues, and they find my teachings online to be relevant,
Mhm.
and they like to listen to me, especially like when I was doing TikTok a few years ago. They liked when I had a mother and daughter write me and said that she would watch TikToks, not TikToks, Snapchat with her kid before they went to bed so that she would have this like Jewish experience. And then TikTok is like, there's lots of rabbis on TikTok right now, doing their thing on TikTok, whatever that might be. Some play music, some do Torah, some do other stuff, um, and that has made Judaism actually a lot more accessible,
Totally.
and for some in our community that's scary, and for other people that's really exciting.
Totally. Yeah, I agree. And for those of you who don't know, Sefaria is a website where you can, look up anything in the Bible and the Torah and the Talmud. Most of the commentaries are translated by now. Some of us still had to buy books when we were in rabbinical school not long ago. So I'm very upset about this coming out much later, but it was there for part of my rabbinical world. So and you're so right. It's almost like a book, right? When you write a book and you put it out there in the library and you just don't know who's going to buy it or see it or read it or check it out. And you're right. I mean,
Yeah,
this webinar right now that we're doing could be out there in like 20 years.
yeah, yeah,
So, or longer. So that's
yeah.
fascinating
Mhm.
to think about in those terms. Um, okay, so the role of technology is helping people create more accessibility and also find a rabbi that maybe they didn't they couldn't because they live in middle America or parts of the world where there's no rabbi. I think that's a
Mhm.
really great point. I oversee the conversion program here at American Jewish
Mm.
University, and I have so many people from all over the world who want to convert
Mhm.
to Judaism. And I asked myself that too. I mean, obviously, I'm like, what is it that you find so special about our people?
Mhm.
But it is fascinating because they do point out stuff that I've taken for granted for
Yeah.
sure.
Mhm.
So that is a really, really, really great point. Um, some more questions are coming in. One is specific. I'm going to ask this and then I'm going to go back to our regularly scheduled programming that I have a few more questions. So Marlene wrote, I'm so moved by the actions done to the two Justins in Tennessee who were expelled by the racist legislator. What can we do as Jews, as Jewish allies to support their return and support their voices?
Um, yeah, there's so much to say about that. So the Tennessee Three, which I kind of love that we brand things. One, I think it's interesting. Well, the white woman was very clear that she said that she believe her job was saved because she's white. I do know one, like Justin Jones has gotten his job back. I do not know about Justin Peterson, Peter, yeah, the other one. And as a black person who has seen this movie play out multiple times, many people have maybe haven't seen this sequel or seen this movie. What you're watching play out in real time is what happens when white people try to silence black voices. And what's really sad for me, but true in general, is this another example in this case of young black people, young black men standing up to protect the rights of everyone. Most of the children in that capital are white. Most of the people in that capital that are chanting,
Yeah.
"Do your job," are white people. These three people care, in my opinion, and I don't live in Tennessee, care more about those children than all those white men, and most of them are white men in that legislature. That they would rather spend more time shutting them up than actually listening to the children, and then most of them are listening to the protesters and the Capitol. Now, what can we do? You know, we all can do different things. Like if going to Tennessee helps, sending money helps, retweeting stuff, sharing stuff, talking about what you witnessed, telling your friends what you watched, making our country do better. I mean, remember this all started because our country has a huge, I don't know how we're going to tell this to our grandchildren if we ever get this better, like why we just didn't remove guns, like certain guns from our society.
Yeah.
And retelling that story and telling people what you witnessed and telling people how you feel about it. And also for the white people listening, maybe think about the times you may not have listened to a black person and why this is, or maybe your own example of something that like this has happened. But basically sharing this with as many people as possible. And yes, donating money is always a great thing.
You're kind of doing a great transition and going back to the Haggadah because it's about telling and
Yeah.
retelling the story. And I guess I kind of want to understand a little bit more about what is the ultimate, because there's a bunch of questions coming in here. So, how can we be more inclusive in our synagogue? You know, we have someone from South Carolina, we have other parts of North America. What is it that we can do to be more inclusive? I'll just share that I've always said infiltrate the curriculum. I always think that, you know, there's ways to write down, you know, how can we have an inclusive, let's say, Seder, not teaching everyone that we dip in salt water, we dip in vinegar, we got people dipping in lemon juice, you know, so how can we teach that in a way from a young age? But what would you say to that answer?
So I see this as two different things. Like
Okay.
one, like teaching how people do things differently is one thing, but the larger question about how to be more inclusive. And one of the things that I do in my work with Reconstructing Judaism is I try to help communities have the internal conversation, the internal unpacking of how to be more inclusive. So it's one thing to say you want to be more inclusive, but do you really want to be? That's like, those are really hard questions that people need to ask themselves. You know, what does it mean for you to be inclusive? You know, um, and also for communities that do have usually a small number of people of color in their communities, and a growing number of children of color in their communities, how to make sure that the people of color in your communities are seen and they're growing up in an environment where they can be seen and heard and feel like they belong. And part of that is listening. Um, and sort of what I often tell communities is like the thing we do during the month of Elul, which is Heshbon and Nefesh, like the internal accounting of our souls, thinking about who we really are. Like that's what I'm saying, who we really are, and who do we want to be, and wrestling with that. Um, and if part of that wrestling is that you feel like you're in a community with a sizable number of people of color, but your community doesn't have a lot of people of color, then asking the real questions of what that looks like. And if your own personal lives are not diverse, then it's going to be harder for you to have more diversity in your spiritual lives.
I think that's true. And I also think that part of our current reality is that we walk into certain liberal settings, like I kind of said at the very beginning of our time together, and they're predominantly Ashkenazi,
Mm-hmm.
white, and it becomes really hard um, to be heard because it feels like you're the only one talking sometimes. And I've
Mm-hmm.
often felt like the token of diversity in the building.
Yeah.
I actually was in rabbinical school. So yeah, so I guess I wonder, I mean, do we have to keep speaking out, or is there other ways that we can kind of support each other? I mean, what can I do? I mean, what can we do? I really though, I mean, it makes me a little bit riled up hearing all of this because it kind of brings back memories of students coming up to me and feeling like they're not included in services, or having an altercation with another person about not different ways of not being seen as a person. And so I guess I go back to continuing asking these questions
Mhm.
so that we can find ways where we can listen better. Would you say the same?
Yeah, like so RRC, the Reconstructions Rabbinical College, has the most racially diverse student body it's ever had. And also the Reconstructions Rabbinical College is a smaller rabbinical program. Um, RRC is about to graduate its first two Asian rabbis. And then the following year, they will have graduated their third Black rabbi. And then there's some gaps. And then there's like that this year has like several Black rabbinical students. Um, and by connecting with other marginalized people, um, that makes things easier. So one of the pieces of advice that I think, well, this isn't doesn't apply anymore because, one of the things I told RRC as I was heading out the door, if you want to make a safer environment for other Black Jews to come through, or other Jews of color, then you need to actively recruit more Jews of color. And that's what they're doing. They actually are recruiting more Jews of color, and they're also trying to they have looked at their curriculum and to see how it is so Ashkenazi slash white centered. And so what I would say for you and me and other people is to, um, the more we talk to each other, the better it's going to be.
Right. And the more we recruit, doesn't mean just for rabbinical school, but even in our synagogues. I mean, the
Oh yeah,
more
yeah.
diverse the faces are, the more it doesn't feel like we're leaning on someone to speak on
Mhm.
behalf of a lot of other people, because it's exhausting.
Right,
You want to just come to a community and be,
right.
you
Yeah, for
know?
boards, don't just look for one Black or brown board member. Try to put two on at a time instead of one.
Yes. This is
Mhm.
great advice. I'm taking it back to all of the rabbinical schools. I kind of want to end on, what is your message to the world? Um, and I have one, we were thinking about you were talking about freedom and how that's a theme of Passover, which it completely is.
Mhm.
And I always think about the cries of the Israelites to God.
Mhm.
And I always wonder to myself, what did they cry? What did
Mm.
they cry out? And so I want to give two of that. It's what your message in general, if you want to leave us with anything, of course, but also, what do you think the world is crying out for right now in that sense?
So
That
what is the
needs to
world
be
crying
heard.
out for? So here's the thing, okay? So when you say that about the Israelites crying out, and what happens when Moses shows up, they don't believe him. They don't, Moses, the God's like, go tell the Israelites, and I'm here to free them. And they go, they're like, who the hell are you? Like, please go away. Moses goes back to God, and God's like, they don't believe me. They laugh at me, right? Um, and eventually Moses does free the Israelites. That's where I feel like we are right now. We are crying out for help, and we have messengers coming, in different forms, and we're not listening to them. We're not taking their advice. And we are crying out for help. Our society right now, when I think about the Joneses, the Justins, uh, and what happened, and then there was another mass shooting the next day, and there's probably one right now. And that is sickening. But and yes, this is US focused because that's where I am, but I do believe our society is crying out. And maybe our world is crying out too for help and the environment. And I think that the messengers are there to help us, but we have to actually listen.
Yeah. And while you were saying that, they didn't believe Moses, I also want to point out Moses didn't believe in himself either at
True.
first.
That's true.
And so we all have
True.
imposter syndrome,
Hmm.
and so it
Hmm.
really helps when we can be a mirror for one another and really say, I hear you, I see you, what you're saying is valid.
Right.
And even if I don't understand it, that doesn't mean it's not real.
Right.
And try to do the work internally to help better understand it yourself. I think that's wow, I'm really leaving with like all kinds of thoughts in my head. So thank you so much. But I also want to leave a moment for you to let me see if there's any more questions, but also if there's anything you'd want to that we didn't talk about that you'd want to ask. There's some questions, by the way, coming in about Jews of color and Asians being let into other rabbinical seminaries. I'm not really sure. That's an interesting question. I do know that Hebrew Union College, where I went, we had people of all walks of faith and JTS as well. But I can't speak on behalf of every seminary.
I know.
Yeah, sorry.
They can be more specific quickly. Can answer.
Yeah, but yeah, Jewish Theological Seminary, definitely. I think that was a correction that came in.
Hmm.
Yeah, is there anything that you'd want to leave us with the message of maybe I don't know, what's freedom?
That's freedom. Um,
Mental slavery and
yeah. I will say, first of all, thank you for having me and I get to hang out with you for a little bit, and for all the however many people are here. And this is what I'll say this. Okay. So rabbinical schools right now, because I am a rabbi and I do part of my job is to mentor rabbinical students. Um, there are so many young people who want to become rabbis. Let me tell you, there are so many young people that actually want to be Jewish leaders. Let's just leave it at that. They want to be Jewish leaders. And we need to do our job to mentor those people coming up, um, and to help them find their way in Judaism. Because if we don't, and they will leave. The people have left. That doesn't necessarily mean they're giving up their Judaism, and some people does mean that they are giving up their Judaism.
sure.
But if we don't do our jobs of creating safe environments for all Jews, whether they be black, brown, queer, trans, whatever, we're not we're going to lose future rabbis. We're going to lose future executive directors. We're going to lose future Jewish leaders, future cantors, future all that stuff. And we don't want that. We were like 1.9% of the American population. Um, and freedom means surviving. And we can't afford to actually lose people who actually want to participate in Jewish life, who want to participate in the Jewish experience. I'm not talking, we got enough people who don't want to. I'm talking about the people who actually want to engage in Jewish life. And I say that because I get messages regularly from people who feel like they are made to feel like they don't belong. So that's my
Beautiful.
closing remark.
I think the last thing I'll say is just at the very beginning of a book that we were all given to read at American Jewish University, there was a section on why do we say no? Is it a lazy no? Is it a no because you're scared of change? And so I want us to all leave away with all of these messages. And thank you so much, Rabbi Sandra Lawson, for being here at the end of our Chag, at the end of Passover, to talk about pursuing justice and equity and helping this world become a better place, but also recognizing what are we really afraid of when we say no. And you alluded to Pharaoh saying, there was a Pharaoh that we didn't know in this generation. And it will be inevitable that the Jewish people will change in the generations to come. Amen.
Yeah.
May it be Kenyan Yiratzon, because we are growing and we are human and we aren't static. And you and I wouldn't be here today if we didn't
Yeah,
create the change that would allow us to be female
that's
rabbis
true.
leading the world. So thank you again so much. And thank you all to our audiences, and enjoy the rest of your Passover holiday.
Yeah. Thank you. Bye.
Thank you so much.